Hey, good evening. Hope everybody's having a good weekend here. Have some stratocumulus overhead, and you can see it's coming out of the west. Probably a little bit of isentropic lift helping with these clouds. They've got a very dense look, and they're up at about 6,000 feet or so. And we'll check that out on the charts here. So let's go to that, and this is the upper air chart up at 300 millibars. So this is going to be about 30,000 feet, and there's some big changes coming up for the end of the month. So what we start out with today is kind of a zonal pattern, a couple of major waves moving through the flow. The main long wave trough is out over the western coast, probably another long wave off the east coast. So we're kind of in between with this flat ridge and a couple of smaller scale waves moving through that flow. Over the next few days, we're going to see that one wave moving to the eastern U.S., the approach of another system from the west coast, and still remains fairly zonal, so we're not going to see much of a change in the pattern. There's going to be an upper level ridge across the central plains about midweek. And then after Thursday and Friday, we start developing this very powerful jet in the Rockies, the central Rockies around Colorado, Wyoming. And you can see that those are winds of about 140 knots. And it looks like that's coupled with a subtropical jet with that main polar jet up to the north. So this is going to mean a good chance of weather on the Great Plains about Friday going into Saturday, a week from now. So could be chances of severe weather, a possibility if the Gulf is open, and if we develop a low-level jet with that system. And then you can see that's going to shift rapidly to the east, and by Saturday, the 18th, it'll be on the east coast. Another major cold event in that area, northwest flow pushing that cold air into the northeast U.S. Then we develop another ridge the following week around the 20th, and forgot what day Thanksgiving is, but anyway, in any case, around the 20th or 21st, continued kind of a zonal pattern there. So not much change in the weather. However, towards the very end, you see here, now we're starting to develop a meridional pattern. And this is kind of the opposite of zonal. So you see that right there. The waves are starting to go very high amplitude towards the 26th and 27th. And when we get to the end of the frame, you see that right there. That is the Polar Express. So there's a good chance that with that, we're going to push some Arctic air down into the central and eastern U.S. So probably a cold event coming up for the 27th through the 29th of this year. So we'll have to watch that there. So you see that there, very high amplitude pattern. And that gets to the end of the run. So that's 384 hours out right there. So there's a look at the surface chart right there. And what we see, pretty common with cold air sitting over the central U.S. Looks like we've got a front off to the south. You can see the flow in the Gulf out of the northeast right there. Northeast across Texas and easterly in Oklahoma. So that tends to be a good setup for isentropic lift. All it takes is a little bit of southerly flow right off the surface to get lift, and if the air mass is humid in that layer, we will get clouds through that area. So the 850 millibar chart at this time, let's check that out. All right, so there's 850 millibars right now, and we don't really have a southerly flow in place, a little bit over the Rio Grande right there. So that's going to definitely support clouds, but the stratocumulus is up a little bit higher, up at about 7,000 millibars. And what we see here, just kind of a westerly flow. I think the clouds may be a little bit under this level, so maybe 850 will be a little bit more representative, but anyway, there is moisture aloft and just not enough lift to get rain out of these clouds. We would need very strong cyclogenesis in the Four Corners area. That would really bring the winds around to the south, and when that happens, we tend to get a rainy pattern in Texas. So anyway, cold front off to the south down in the Gulf, banked up against the Rockies. Temperatures a little bit more mild in the Four Corners there. Looks like kind of a stationary front through the Great Basin right there, and possibly a new front developing up to the north. And one way you can find fronts, a little bit of a tip, if you go to the SPC Mesoanalysis page, I'll bring this up here. Okay, so there we go. There's the SPC Mesoanalysis. If you go to, let's see, it's going to be, trying to find out what menu this is under. Yeah, velocity, tensor, magnitude. This is actually a good way to find frontal boundaries. And we don't see any in the central plains at this time because it's dominated by high pressure, but maybe if we bring this out a little bit further west, we might see something different out there. But this product tends to outline boundaries very well. Looks like kind of a mess in that area, very noisy. I'm trying to find a good example of that. Let me try to go down to Texas. Probably not going to find any because of that northerly flow there. But if you do have a boundary, it's going to look a little bit like this. And I think we do see a little bit of that going on in West Texas off to the west. And let me hunt around. I was hoping to find a good example of that, but I guess with high pressure, we're just not seeing that. But there is a good example off the Carolinas coast right there. You can see the convergent winds on the coast. So that's outlining some sort of boundary right in between. So when we have a front in the area, definitely check that product out right there. Back to the charts, let's check out. Okay, I think we're done with that one, so let's press on. Take a look at maybe a few cross sections, and we'll try Del Rio to Green Bay. So we know that that's probably going to involve the front down to the south, probably colder air up in this region. And what we would probably see is the isotropes higher and higher as we get towards the cold air. So let's bring that up. Okay, so the red lines, those are going to be isotropes. So the cold air out in this region where the values are lower, you can see we've got 280 Kelvin right there. That's going to be about 43 degrees or so. And then when we go south, we get into higher values, and we have 290 at the surface around Fort Worth. And 290 Kelvin, that's going to be about 17 Celsius. So that's going to be about 63 Fahrenheit. So temperatures warm as you go to the south. And as a result, the isotropes have this slope right there. And I don't see anything that looks like a frontal boundary. It's very well distributed in the upper levels, but we do have a little bit of a, let me see here, let me check, see if we have relative humidity. Yeah, we don't have relative humidity. That's really an important product. The green line here is mixing ratio. That's going to be the absolute water vapor content of the air. Relative humidity, however, shows how close it is to saturation. And that's really what we want to see on isotropic analysis charts. So if we have high relative humidity in this area and wind flowing out of the south, that would be a good setup for lift. So let me check out the isotropic lift charts real quick. Start out with the lower values and try to find a value over our forecast area that corresponds to the height of the cloud. So what we see here is 900 millibars. It's going to be about 2,500 feet. We've got kind of indeterminate motion kind of along the isotropes. A little bit of lift indicated. The isotropes are a little bit higher out there in New Mexico, so any movement that the wind barbs show here is going to be isentropic lift. And this chart does show relative humidity. You can check that out on the bottom right there. You can see where it shows fill, RH fill right there, the fill color. That's going to be mixing ratio, or that's going to be relative humidity, and then mixing ratio is going to be the green lines right there. So that's the absolute water vapor content. But what we're interested in is this shading, and it's very, very humid there at these levels. So let's go up a little bit higher. These clouds are going to be up at about 800 to 775 millibars. So we'll go up a little bit higher there. Still down at 900. 850. Okay, we're getting a little bit better right there. There's 825 millibars. That's getting towards the height of the cloud. Looks like some weak isentropic lift in the San Antonio area and very high relative humidities in that area. And then at the 305 Kelvin level, we start getting into westerly flow and dry air. So this is getting into the air up above that stuff. A little bit of an error down in Arizona. So let's check that out on the upper level chart. Okay, so there is the Fort Worth sounding taken about an hour ago, showing very humid air all the way up to about 770 millibars, which is about probably about 7,000 feet there. So humid beneath that level, and then above that, we've got a dry layer associated with this westerly flow loft. So that's kind of what's happening there. Two different air masses over the Fort Worth area. So moving around the country, we'll try going to Illinois. We know that that's going to be under a high pressure area. Looks like a frontal inversion at about 850 millibars right there. So colder air beneath that 850 millibar inversion, and a very low tropopause all the way down at about 340 millibars. Northerly flow at all levels, which is interesting. We try Nashville. Nashville is showing an inversion a little bit higher, and I'm not sure if that's going to be the frontal inversion or not. I would have to kind of look around at different soundings. Let me try Wilmington. Yeah, that's not showing that frontal inversion very well, but very humid air all the way up to about 12,000 feet there. So if you go from all the different soundings and look at each one, that gives you kind of a three-dimensional profile of what's happening. This is Topeka, Kansas, showing a little bit of moisture down in the lowest 5,000 feet, and above that, some pretty dry air there, and northwesterly flow. Okay, let's look at the infrared imagery. Not very much going on, but down in the lower levels, you can see some evidence of the low clouds right there. So all of this right there, that's low cloud. That's all pretty much stratocumulus. So that's the symbol there for stratocu. So that's what's going on there. And then above that, we've got cirrus moving in. And this is indicative of an upper level ridge, probably located about like that. So you see that flow over the ridge like that. So let's look at the 500 millibar or the 300 millibar chart. Okay, we've got 200. Let me see if I can pull up 300. And there we go. So, yep, a little bit of an upper level ridge, pretty much all the way up to Colorado and on up into the Wyoming area. And this is showing, it looks like a bit of a subtropical jet. So you see that right there. It looks like the jet is located from about the San Joaquin Valley up to Denver, and then it moves southeast into the Fort Worth and Louisiana area. And it looks like that's loosely coupled with a polar front jet, kind of like that right there. So let's go back to the satellite imagery. Our polar or subtropical jet was looking something like this. And you can see how the majority of the cloud is just along the jet and to the south. So that's a very common characteristic there, and you can use that to find the polar front jet. And then north of that, you're going to find either the this is how you find the subtropical jet. You can kind of use that similarly for the polar front jet, and in this case the polar front jet is up to the north, and you're going to find either that or the polar vortex on the poleward side of that jet right there. Similar principle applies right here in the southeast U.S. I would pretty much expect to find a jet somewhere like this, from about Mississippi up to West Virginia and up to New York City. Looks like most of the cloud is on the south side of that right there. And then on the north, we've got what looks like downward motion. That's kind of the transverse sinking motion on the poleward side of the jet right there. So let me check that out real quick. So that's kind of how we use everything to kind of verify what's going on. And let's see, we identified, looks like we got a different position here. Yeah, it looks like a little bit of a, let me see here, 25, 30. Yeah, the flow is a little bit stronger down in this area right here. So I think we came pretty close. The actual jet location, somewhat like that right there. Let me go back and look at the water vapor imagery. Okay, so this is showing yeah, there's this area of darkness right here over St. Louis, and that seems to show a jet a little bit further north. Looking at this, it's not quite as apparent as what I was seeing there on the infrared imagery. You can see there's kind of a much different picture in this area. Looks pretty clear and homogeneous there. So if we go to the water vapor imagery, it does look much different. And yeah, that would probably have me placing a jet a little bit like that right there. And then down to the south, looks like we got a bit of a pineapple express coming in from the Gulf. And the soundings in that area, Slidell, around New Orleans, looking like this right here. A lot of upper level moisture. And then further east along the coast, Tallahassee, Florida, showing a lot of that upper level moisture right there. And occasionally that Pineapple Express is a lot deeper, and you'll see that in some episodes we'll extend all the way down to about 10,000 feet right there. And when that moves over an area where there's a baroclinic system developing, we can get a pretty good winter weather situation going on. Okay, let me check out the chat here. We have Ron Chalfant and Mr. Manlet joining us for snowfall in northern Illinois. High was about 37. Very good. Fun with Tech is here. Dwayne Ward, Burl H. Ryan Toomey's. Occasional showers around today all day. Sue M is with us in cool, rainy Indiana. In bed with the flu. Sorry to hear that. Yeah, NyQuil is definitely a help for that. I need to get my flu shot before it gets too late. The peak of flu season is actually in March, believe it or not. So there's probably still time to do that before we get into the peak of flu season. 42 degrees where Veo Joe is. Mike Bexley is with us also. Burl H. Liked the isentropic analysis. Burl H. asks if isentropic lift is the same as synoptic lift. They're a little bit different. Synoptic lift is more of a... It doesn't have any specific meaning, synoptic lift. That probably characterizes lift according to scale, like a very large scale lift going on. And what goes through my mind when I hear synoptic lift, I'm thinking of dynamic lift, and that's where you have lift along the jet. You know, the transverse circulations, the quadrants around the jet maxes, and also short waves moving through the flow, the motion ahead of those. That would be dynamic lift, and that's what I think of. Isentropic lift can be mesoscale, definitely, so it's probably good to keep those terms separate there. Ryan says, smack the like button. Breezy conditions where Ryan is. And see, we got 10 viewers, so we're taking a little bit of a hit because of me having to take a break last week. It's really hard to keep continuity going when I've got this book project, and you can still see that's still underway and still got a little ways to go there. But we're getting there. Where did my preview window go? Okay, there it is. Yeah, so I'm writing a little bit about profilers and velocity azimuth display there. Hopefully we'll get that done. I'm trying to close out the chapters right now, and hopefully we'll get to that soon, and then things can get back to normal. Okay, so let's head into the forecast. We've got a pretty good idea what's going to go on. Zonal flow across much of the central U.S., and then towards the last week of November, a big pattern change as things go meridional there. Okay, so taking a look at the forecast, we're dominated by high pressure over Minnesota. And that's got a pretty large extent all the way across this area right there. This is all dominated by this big polar high. So across the south, northerly flow. And then down in Oklahoma, easterly flow. And you can see that there is an upslope component on this wind right here. So these areas west of the high pressure areas, they tend to get a lot of clouds. So that's all upslope flow right there because of the wind component going from low elevations to high elevations. And when you have a lot of humidity in the air, that's going to mean stratus, clouds, and stratocumulus. For the next 24 hours, you can see the high pressure right there over Illinois, moving over to Ohio. So we've got the high shifting that way. Let's take a look at a sounding in the middle of that high pressure area. I'll pull up one for Ohio tomorrow evening. There's the cold air mass right there. It looks like it has a depth of about maybe 5,000 feet. But above that, northwesterly flow. So this air here, a little bit colder, but it does look like it has kind of a northerly origin right there. Let me try further south around Memphis. Looks like maybe the cold air is a little bit shallower in that area. And you can see the difference right there in the winds, northeast winds right there in the lowest 5,000 feet, and above that, westerly flow. So this air here is probably just kind of your average mid-latitude air. In fact, if you bring it down dry adiabatically like this, you can see there's a temperature there of about 68 Fahrenheit. So if we mixed out all that cold air, we would have kind of a mild, typical day for this time of year, maybe a little bit on the warm side. And then in this area right here, we have southerly flow developing. I'll put up a sounding right there in northeastern Nebraska. And it's showing a little bit of that frontal inversion right there. Still cold air at the surface, 49 degrees in the evening. And above that, there's that warm air right there. You bring that down to the surface adiabatically, dry adiabatically, and we get a temperature there of about 72 Fahrenheit. So this is definitely warm air aloft, and then cold air beneath that. Okay, and you can see some of the veering here with height. See the veering? We go from south to west winds, and that's indicative right there of warm air advection. Okay, over the next 24 hours, high pressure moving out to the east coast, and then by Tuesday, high pressure over that area right there, and you can see the extent of that high all the way down to the southern U.S., and this is about the extent of that high right there. So it's a very large system. And then up to the north, we have a new outbreak of cold air coming south. There's that low pressure right there. So this is going to change the weather a little bit, bringing cold air southward. And then pretty quiet on the east coast, but we're getting grazed in Washington by a new storm system coming on shore right there. Okay, then we go into Wednesday. There goes that little Alberta clipper. And you can see it's bringing more high pressure southward from, actually we got to go all the way up to Manitoba. Big high coming in, and you can see that has a pretty large extent. That's on its way south. The Gulf is open in Texas, by the way, around Thursday. So we're starting to bring up some moisture into East Texas, Arkansas, and Louisiana. Looks like a little bit of an old boundary right through that area right there. See that? I think we're probably pushing a bit of a warm front back up north from the Gulf. I think that's what's happening there, maybe something like that. Then we get into Thursday. Wow, what happened there? Oh yeah, high pressure sweeping through. Pretty big change there in the eastern U.S., and then very deep southerly flow setting in with this cyclogenesis in the northern high plains right there. And associated with that cyclogenesis, we're really pulling together the thermal gradients out over the central Rockies. And you can see right there, it looks like a front from Wyoming to Nevada and California. So we'll be watching for weather, bad weather in North California, northern Nevada, and possibly cyclogenesis in that area if we get a system coming in from the Pacific to pick up that boundary. Things move eastward during the day on Friday. You can see there it goes. Front coming down into Oklahoma right there. The Gulf still is open, bringing moisture northward, so there could be a chance of thunderstorms in Illinois and Indiana, depending on how much moisture we have. Let me check that out. This is going to be 17th at 18Z. Going to look at the dew point at that time. Okay, so there's 17th at 0Z. This is the evening before. So there's the low-level jet bringing moisture northward. And there it goes. You see right there. Looks like the blue right there, that's going to be 60s dew points reaching up into Missouri. And then a little sliver of that coming all the way to the Paducah area. 60s all the way up to that area. So looks like maybe a kind of a marginal chance of severe weather. And then that system moves so quickly eastward that we don't really get much time to advect that moisture northward. Let me try one product here. I'm going to try one of these severe weather parameters. We'll try supercell composite. This analyzes some of the parameters that are favorable for supercells. Let me bring this all the way up to the 17th. Okay, there's 0Z. That's the evening before. This is the morning hours, 12Z. And you can see a little band right there developing from about Davenport down to Fort Smith. And then by the time of peak heating, a little bitty sliver all the way from Paducah down to East Texas, and the value is very low. This is kind of light gray, so we're looking at values only around 1 or 2. So that's barely enough for any severe weather. But, you know, of course, things could change between now and then. That's just something we'll have to watch. If nothing happens, they'll at least get probably some showery weather at that time. Okay, so there goes our system, and behind that, lots of cold air advection coming southward. And then by the 18th, 19th, wow, look at all that cold air advection east of the Mississippi River. And you can see the thickness lines showing a very extensive thermal trough, coldest air over the Lake Superior area, and 518 decameter thicknesses coming all the way south into New York. So this is going to be a pretty severe cold blast for that region. And then behind that, things kind of moderate, and then we start looking out to the west again. New system coming together. You can see the thickness lines coming together right in this area. That looks like a potent area for development around the 20th. A few lines out of the eastern states like that, so we have to watch for that to start coming together. Something could be picking that up, and yeah, it looks like towards the 21st, they're starting to come together right there. So it looks like maybe a system starting to develop in that area. New Alberta Clipper developing up to the north. Okay, then looks like a little elevated system comes across the Rockies around the 22nd. See how quickly that moves. So that could be kind of associated with a shortwave right there. And then that other Alberta Clipper that really comes together, and then we get a good cold blast moving south around the 23rd. So this is going to be kind of a cold pattern for the eastern U.S. and kind of variable for the central U.S., but they will get at least a little bit of that cold air in a couple weeks. So you see right there. And you can see that 540 line coming pretty far south. This is kind of like the rain-snow line. Almost all the way down to Atlanta, down to Charlotte, and then back towards Topeka, and then up to Rapid City. So, yeah, all that's pretty cold there. So another cold blast for the northeast U.S. And remember, 27th, this is where we start seeing that pattern change to a very meridional pattern. The jet starting to come like that, and that's kind of an ominous development. So I'm going to expect to see Arctic air developing up to the north. And indeed, looks like a 1040 millibar high up to the north right there. Things start to get very active. Cyclogenesis on the 28th right there, that's going to kind of hold the Arctic air back. But we're dumping a lot of fresh snow in that area. That could spell development of Arctic air at that time. And let's see, let me switch over. I'm going to try to get a hemispheric chart of that last frame. Yeah, it's kind of a mess there, but that's that last frame around the 28th. And let's see here, polar high in the Northwest Territories right there. So I'm kind of outlining the limits of that system. And there's probably going to be more of that polar air developing here with that fresh snowpack. And then the new system yeah, coming together right in that area. But at this point, we're just kind of looking in the crystal ball. Interesting, new system coming across the Caribbean. Wonder what's going on with that. Let me go back about 24 hours and see where that comes from. Okay, it's out over Jamaica somewhere. Let me go back another 24 hours. Very interesting. That's kind of... Let me focus on that area. I'm going to bring this down to the Caribbean area. Okay. I'm going to go back to 216 hours. I guess we've got a little bit of a development right there off the coast of Nicaragua. 228 hours. This is going to be on November 22nd. And here's the 23rd. Yeah, we've got development around the 23rd. And I guess we got ourselves a very late season hurricane. It's not unprecedented. I know that there's been November hurricanes, and Elena comes to mind back in '85. And this thing looks like it has kind of a slow movement. And there it is, heading for Jamaica. Let me see if I can get a central pressure on that. For that one, I'm going to switch over to MSLP and winds, and that should get, yeah, 975. Let me go back a little bit, 968. I don't have the table in front of me, but I'm thinking that's probably like a Cat 2 storm right there. 966 and then 958. Interesting. So it looks like it gets to its max intensity right around this area, and then it starts weakening very slowly as it moves toward Jamaica. And then on the last frame right there, looking at a 989 millibar storm just off the coast. And very likely we're going to see a much different movement on that, but that's just kind of looking ahead into the crystal ball, and we know at least that things are going to be stormy out in this area. So we'll keep an eye on that right there. All right, let's see. That's probably about all I got here. Let me take a look at the chat. Indiana ChaserCon on the 18th. Interesting. Okay, yeah, let's see. 18th of November. Wow. Yeah, usually our Chaser events and Skywarn events here in the Central Plains, those are usually around January through March. Interesting to see one in November. Mike Bexley, looking forward to the new book. A little discussion about software. Yeah, if you're talking about digital atmosphere, yeah, that's true. You can get the professional version later if you want and just pay the difference in price later. That's not a problem right there. But digital atmosphere, yeah, definitely get that. I use that all the time. And Ryan there, mentioning the tropical storm there, strange direction that far south. And Ron says, thanks, Tim, always learning from your program. So I guess that'll do it for me. Okay. Let me give you the other version. I've got a couple different mixes of this, believe it or not. Let me run the other one. Yeah, there's one of the old-fashioned ones. I'll let it close with that. So anyway, take care, and we will see you tomorrow.